Well, we are here in Montreal with some friends, and Erín Moure. Hello, Erín Moure.
Hi.
Where are we exactly?
We are in Place Duville in Old Montreal. In Montreal, yeah.
And it's late afternoon, and anybody who comes upon this video later is going to see some activity behind us, which is exciting. We're feeling the texture of the city. And very much thanks to Erín for guiding us. And Kate Colby is with us. Hi, Kate.
Hi.
Yes. And Sophia DuRose.
Hi.
Hello. Laynie Browne.
Hi.
I want to acknowledge that Laynie Browne has curated all the proceedings. Erín may have picked the location, but Laynie has worked with everybody, all the poets, to figure out exactly what we want to talk about and what the excerpts are. And thank you, Laynie, for that. Yes. And Hoa Nguyen, I'm so happy that you came to us from Toronto to hang out.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's been such a pleasure. We are going to talk about, I also want to acknowledge Amy Shea, who has come up from Ottawa. We love Amy. Thank you, Amy. Amy has joined us, a ModPo regular. We're going to talk about an excerpt from a book called 8-Track, published in 2019 at Talon Books on the other end of this Canadian continent, in the Vancouver area. And we're going to be talking about a poet whose name is Oana Avasilichioaei. And that's not great, but it's close. And it's a Romanian name plus a whole lot of things. And Erín, do you want to add anything about Oana that we should know before we get started?
Oana's both a translator, she's a poet, she's a sound artist, she's a photographer, very active in Montreal in both French and English. And this book's incredible.
Can you hold it up?
Yeah. Oh, sure. This book's an incredible book of. I'll just read since I'm staring at it. 8-Track offers chilling reminders of the ongoing perils of global migration, of how a body can get lost in translation. So it talks. It's a border crossing book in many ways.
Wonderful. So we're going to read. It's a bit of a score. We're going to read across the page, and anybody encountering this in ModPo will get access to a PDF copy, and we'll be able to follow along. We're going to read the first page, as it were. Erin's going to read what's on the verso, and Kate is going to read the interleaving recto lines. So whenever you two are ready.
Yeah. So it's side A of a poem called Voices Remix. One voice imagines speaking but chooses to remain silent.
If this were theater, voices would be cells, veins, cataracts.
In the next room, a voice is restless, jittery. On the second,
If this were a symphony, voices would be unwanted intrusions.
floor, a voice refuses to get down on all fours while another voice drools with the promise of submission.
If this were a meditation, voices would be interior.
Out in the courtyard, a voice can be heard proclaiming, attempting to end.
If this were advertising, voices would compete for who got paid the most.
The embargo. Voices are given over to voices, then given over to covert tunnels, indirect routes, whispered innuendos, labyrinthine tracks.
If this were war, voices would be wounded, hard to bear.
Down the hallway, a voice lurches in the staccato rhythm of heels clicking on tiles.
If this were research, voices would plead the fifth.
One voice denies it all, one voice confesses everything, while the bedroom voice of another sugarcoats the impasse.
If this were an inquisition, voices would grow secretive.
There's much here about voice, obviously, so I think it would be good for all of us to just chime in on what voice means. In this poem, when we talk in contemporary poetry about voice, there's lately, in the last couple of decades, a reaction against the idea of voice as a thing that you just have and you got to find it and all that stuff. So I think it might be a good thing to do. We'll start maybe with Sophia, just, wing it. Voice. What does voice mean, either here or generally?
Well, here I think voice is being used as a metonym for many different things, just across both sides of the page. The voice is a stand-in for I mean, each line it's a stand-in for something else, really, but it's like this all-encompassing metonym for an individual experiencing different things. Yeah.
Hoa, would you continue this more about voice?
Well, I was thinking about this presentation of voice as having agency, but then also this as opposed to this speculative possibility for voice, and the ways in which voice is both embodied, but then diverts into other spaces that are maybe blocked or not serving this idea of voice, which can be conflated with, I guess, like personhood, but there's also a kind of collectivity gesture, even as it's one voice.
Kate, Laynie, Erín, all three of you, or any one of you, on the left side, the verso there, the voices seem to be coming from lots of places. And I wonder if we could collect particular readings of where each of those voices might come from. The blurb, 8-track, echolocates. I think it's a blurb, might be a review. Echolocates, love that verb. The nameless, the noisy, the scattered, and the voiceless. Erín, can you help us locate some of these voices?
Well, I see the first voice as perhaps the voice of the poet or the voice of the poem. One voice imagines speaking but chooses to remain silent, and then is hearing the other voices. So the voice of the poem is actually listening to all these other voices. The actual voice of the poem is not making racket, you know.
Oh my God, that's brilliant. Wait, can we say that? Can we make that point again? That's amazing. You're saying that the voice that we begin with is listening to the voices.
Yeah, because one voice, it starts off by saying one voice imagines speaking but chooses to remain silent. And then in the next room, a voice is restless, jittery. And then so I imagine the voice is actually listening. The poem is listening to all these different voices. Right. And it's the same like what Hoa was saying, that it's like the voice is the embodiment of subjectivity or agency. These are subjects who are, when you use your voice, you're enacting something, you know. So even if they're not enacting much, you can enact a little bit with a voice. So that, to me, it shows like this kind of autonomy and subjectivity that, and Sophia was pointing at that as well.
Laynie, Kate, either of you want to add to this?
Sure. I'm also noticing about voice that it's anonymous. You know, if there were a name, it wouldn't be anonymous. I'm imagining it, you know, polyvocal, many different. But in terms of the locations, I'm seeing in the second line an anxious interior space, whether it's inside the head of somebody or inside a dwelling. In the next, voice refuses to get down on all fours, while another voice drools with the prompts of submission, power dynamics, domination, which it's not necessarily a place, but it's something that's happening between more than one person. And I think that we also have domestic space, we have space that's public space where people are moving, and we have the sound of staccato rhythm of heels clicking on tiles, as if steps were a voice. So that's sounding.
Lots of different voices, louder, softer, denying, confessing, all manner of voice. Kate, your thought on this?
Well, all the voices are kind of whisperings and rumblings that are taking place off camera or off stage, out in the courtyard, down the hallway. It's as though someone left the tape recorder on for all of humanity, kind of.
Anybody want to toss in, before we look at the right side of the page, toss in what a bedroom voice would be? Sorry, it's obvious,
That's a
but
classic. It's an expression, though.
it's an expression, right? And
Yeah.
it's almost comic there, right? The bedroom voice. Among the voice that denies and the voice that confesses, there is the bedroom voice.
Sugarcoating things.
Yeah.
Not to be trusted.
Probably not. Let's go to the right side. What is this in If This Were? Sophia, any idea? And then Erin?
Well, I'm thinking about what Erin said about the one voice of the initial line and how perhaps that one voice is the voice of the speaker, or maybe the poem itself, listening to the other voices that join it. This list of if this were theater, if this were symphony, these voices would be something else, but because this is a poem, it's not theater or symphony or meditation, it's a poem. These voices are not any of these other things. There's something new. There's something that has been found on this page, and they can't be conflated with like the voices of war or.
So you're saying that this would be the poem or the work, right? Maybe this being the left side stuff about voices, but the if lines are reminding us that it's a poem. It could be that, but it's not. It could be that if it's not. Erin, what were you thinking?
Oh, probably. It sounds like I'm thinking almost the opposite, but
That's okay.
which is which
We have many voices here.
yeah. No, I'm giving that. But I'm giving it in a. It sounds like it's the opposite, but it's another. This other side of the coin is kind of like. To me, this is, if this were theater, it's this track, or this track in the book. Maybe it's this book, this work. And if this were this, that, and the other thing, the voices would be this. And I read this and I say to myself, but these voices are cells, veins, cataracts, unwanted intrusions, interior, competing over something, wounded, hard to bear. There's some probably pleading the fifth over here, confessing and this and that, and growing secretive. So that means, since that conditional part, that is all true, the voices are those things, then this book, this poem, is theater, symphony, meditation, advertising, war, research, and inquisition.
Interesting. So what do we do with the if logic? Maybe it's obvious, but I think we should talk about it. Why, Laynie? Why if?
Well, as I said earlier, I'm interested in that speculative anaphora that the poem is enacting. So it seems like a kind of literary gesture at the same time that it's displacing, or is almost seemed almost playful. But I'm also reminded that this is called, or there's a title that precedes the poem, Voices Remix, Side A. So on a literal level, this is side A of this 8-track piece. That's what I was thinking about, and how those things interact.
Does 8-track mean the old outmoded device that we would use, particularly in an automobile, to stick in a big fat cartridge and play music, or is it the number of tracks in a complicated audio recording that can be dubbed over, or both?
Both.
Can we talk about the first for a second? What resonance, does 8-track, the old media, have here? I mean, I can't. I mean, I'm an old track guy. Old 8-track guy. I'm actually an old 1-track guy, but an old 8-track guy. And when I see the, what do we call those? The angle brackets facing in that direction, I keep thinking about all those damn tapes. Is that wrong? I mean, she's doing something very interesting there. Anybody want to pick me up on the 8-track?
Like they're fast forwarding.
Yeah, or slipping, because there was a lot of bad tape.
Because the tapes wore out, and
They wore out in that sometimes you heard two voices because, there were two sides, weren't there? No.
That's cassette.
That's cassette.
That's cassette.
But it went around in a loop, the 8-track. The other thing you didn't have, or else it just went around and tangled all up, and you could never make a noise again.
Well, that you humored me. Let's go back to the second meaning, which is many, many layers of track.
Yeah.
Because track is a very important audio term. Who wants to do something with that? Who's an audiophile? Oh, I shouldn't have asked that because nobody's admitting to that.
Well, they're often layered over one another to create a composite sound.
I can go back to the if.
Okay.
I'm interested in one way of reading the repetition of the it is definition by elimination, although we still don't have a definition, obviously, of what's happening. But So if it's not theater and it's not a symphony, it's not performance, it's not art. If it's not a meditation, then it's not this invisible experience, internal. If it's not advertising, it's not trying to persuade us. If it's not a war, it's not violent. If it's not taking the fifth, it's not refusing to speak. It's not an inquisition, it's not an interrogation. So basically, we know that this being the piece is not any of those things. So I guess it's just pointing out to us that this poem is not that kind of device. It's not an advertising device. It's not created to create your, inner calm. It's not all those things. It's not any of those things.
Oana has been described by many people as an intermedia and translation artist, but I want to focus on intermedia. So this is written. There's no accompanying 8-track or MP3 that I know of, but yet it's so all about voice. So when you read about voice, you think, oh, there's an intermediation going on, or a kind of productive paradox of reading about voice. And so I'd love for us to talk largely about poetry, the poetry of voice, the democracy that is in the multiple voices that succeed, that is to say, get past the old idea that there is one voice in a poem. Let's go anywhere with that. I think that this is a major intervention, and intermedia has something to do with it. And Erín, you're looking at me like you want to talk about intermedia.
No, I don't want to talk about intermedia, but I'm just listening. But I like what you're saying. Actually, I like the idea of this. What did you say? Productive paradox or something?
Paradox of reading about voice.
Reading about voice, and then that the voices come from somewhere else. They are not the voice of the poet. It's the voice of the poem. The voice, like Chuspado always speaks of, the voice of the poem, And the voices that are in the poem are not the voice of the poem, and the voice of the poem is not the voice of the author. It's nobody found their voice. They found other people's voices.
The blurb also talks about, and this may be a throwaway word because it's to talk about discordant melodies, polyphonic voices is almost a cliche at this point, but it works out really well here. Discordance. And I wonder when we look, and in a minute maybe we'll ask Erín to read the last verso, which doesn't have a matching recto. And there we hear a line that says, if certain voices were given a harp, so the if carries over to the left side in that instance, if certain voices were given a harp, they would play out of tune or give up the instrument and play with themselves. And so this is like playing with discordance, but also harp, playing out of tune. To me, and I'm saying something simple, I'd love your reaction, all of you, the democracy of voices here, which we all say we want, but it's hard to actually pull off, is going to have to allow people playing the instruments they weren't meant to play and getting it all wrong in some strict sense. Anybody want to comment on that situation of discordance?
But
Anybody play an instrument badly?
Getting it wrong doesn't necessarily mean getting it wrong.
Obviously, yes.
Yeah.
Certainly that is what Oana means, right?
Let's take the obvious.
Sophia, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking about being taught writing when I was younger and being told that tone and voice were very important, and this like kind of archaic idea that voice came from like perhaps this divine intervention of like you were struck with inspiration and you had to wait for that inspiration to strike before you had the poem with the richest voice or whatnot, or like looking at a canon of poetry and being like where like they were inspired by something outside of themselves, but that something outside of themselves not being like other people or just the world around them. It was something unattainable for like the common person just trying to write a poem to access. And all the voices in this make me think that like a voice in a poem can come just from listening to other people and and wanting to listen to other
Wanting
people.
to listen to other people, yeah. The first line in the passage that Erin's about to read for us, if to deny existence is to deny a voice. So existence and having a voice, even for the voiceless, is crucial. I want to turn to Hoa and then to Erin, and then invite Erin to read the last piece. Your thoughts?
I liked what you had to say about this this opening line. If to deny existence is to deny a voice, the abyss falters, which is both like animating the void, but also speaking to that idea that voice is both tied to existence, but then gets thrown into these other scenarios that are at turns are sort of sad or silly or funny, or actually also making statements about capitalism, which we saw earlier.
Erin, your thought, and then maybe read the passage?
Okay, I had just to add a bit to what Hoa and Sophia were saying, and then I had a tiny thought of my own actually too. But when Sophia was saying like learning that the voice is something, is a divine intervention or something. Here, these voices, I'm like, this is not celestial voices going to sing divine harmonies, because if these voices were given a harp, like who plays a harp? It's these little chubby angels with wings, that they would play out of tune and give up the or just go blah and play with themselves. And I don't know what kind of playing with themselves.
Yeah,
well,
you know what they do.
Yeah, but so there's that. There's no divine intervention or celestial voices happening here. And then when Hoa was commenting on the first line, it's this, to my comment on it, which adds to hers, is if to deny existence is to deny voice, the abyss falters. Like the voice and existence are not going to falter. The abyss is going to falter, because this doesn't work. And the other thing is, there's kind of in this page here, which I'm going to read, that people will notice that it's very small or out of the way spaces that are mentioned. Like there's an abyss, there's a void, there's here we don't know, but there's a harp, so we'll say it's celestial. There's a basement, there's a vestibule, there's backstage, and a crawl space. So nobody is in the great hall pronouncing a discourse. The discourse.
Yes.
Everybody's just muttering around in the interstices.
There's a phrase in sound studies and also in recording, like studio recording and broadcasting, voice of God, right? And the voice of God, V-O-G-E, Vog, is the, stentorian voice that says, tonight at 7:30, tune in to the new movie. That's the voice of God. And it also refers to a kind of narration. So in novels, for instance, so Vog is the voice that tells you what to think. Henry Fielding saying, I got this novel all taken care of. You can be sure that this boy is going to find out that he's rich and his father really is, the guy that we were hoping he is. I'm in charge. The opposite of that is a poetics like this. Okay, so Erin's going to read that last page, and then I'm going to invite everybody to offer a final thought, either based on the page or just in general.
So, if to deny existence is to deny a voice, the abyss falters. Arguably, tantrums have been known to put pressure on voices thrown into the void. If certain voices were given a harp, they would play out of tune or give up the instrument and play with themselves. In the basement, a voice resembles a miniature in gouache. The voices that used to congregate in the vestibule now spy on their neighbors while sipping macchiatos. Backstage, voices are null and void. No voice has dared to enter the crawl space for at least half a century.
Final thoughts? Kate, do you have one?
Oh, I was just thinking while Erin was reading the end there that there's a bitter defeatist note at the end there, and possibly a comment on the internet and the voices that used to congregate in the vestibule now spy on their neighbors while sipping macchiatos, and none has dared to enter the crawl space for at least half a century. That the political edge of the voice is no longer available or being employed, I guess.
Well, if we had another hour, we would talk about what you just said in the context of 8 tracks, because of course the engineering that requires doing 8 tracks used to be non-digital, but let's face it, Oana's probably thinking of it as a digital manipulation. So this is a vexed issue, Kate, right? I mean, where are we getting, who's controlling, who's doing the editing, where are the tracks coming from? So, Sophia, do you have a final thought?
I really love what you mentioned about the spaces of this page and how they're not like the great hall of the hub. I was thinking about crawl space as well, actually, because there's this like, no voice has dared to enter the crawl space for at least half a century. And I was trying to think about so that makes me think that the crawl space is a place that like you should try to go into. And then I was like, why? And I was thinking of crawl space in opposition to like whatever structure is being occupied in the first part of the poem that we read, in the bedroom, in the downstairs, in the hallway. And a crawl space is like presumably unfinished and unoccupied, and also like between structures. And so I was thinking of the crawl space as maybe like a home base for a kind of poetry that is kind of like structured differently or previously unoccupied by other people's thoughts, or that's what I was thinking about. And that maybe that's why no one has dared enter it yet, because the in-betweenness can be difficult to manage, but it's also where we have to go.
Great, thank you. Laynie, your final thought?
Yeah, I'm admiring some of the humor in this piece, like the voices spying on each other, and I'm also really interested in the voice in the basement that resembles a painting, and the synesthesia there of sound into image. And also it's kind of funny, like if thinking of a voice as a portrait that is being kept in the basement, because why is it being kept in the basement? Is that an act of humility? Is that a comment on the piece isn't very good, like somebody gave it to you and you don't like it but you don't want to throw it away? Like, it just evokes a lot of possibilities.
Thank you. What?
I'm interested in looking at the typographical choices, that forwarding caret, and then the all caps voice that is both sort of pronouncing and at the same time democratizing in a way. It's not the voice of God, who is also often, gendered in those movie announcement voices. It has features of a kind of we-ness, even as it throws that we in question.
Wow. Erin, final thought?
Well, I just wanted to raise it that there's, in some places, without focusing or concentrating or lecturing at the reader or the receiver, that there's indications to me of like class structures, and that line, the voices that used to congregate in the vestibule, like in the entrance to a building, because they have nowhere to go, they have no money to spend, so they don't want to get too cold, so they don't want to get too far away from the front door or the side door, and you can run in, but somebody's going to chase you out, so you go back out. So it's like just people clustered together, looking at other people going in and out, figuring out what they're up to, are now spying on their neighbors while sipping macchiatos, like they're either in a coffee shop and buying something expensive, or else that just cost them $6, or else they have one of the machines to make those kinds of things at home, so that there's this kind of a class thing happening there, and it's comes back through the book, I think, on occasion, to remind us that that class is an issue, without making it take the foreground or be the big discourse in the Great Hall. It's there. It's there.
Indeed, elsewhere in the book, there's a phrase that in the great era of seeing, right? And that's not necessarily a good thing. The piece of criticism that I read about this says, quoting the great era of seeing, in the great era of seeing, when the boundary between tracking agent, this is a little of the concern that Kate is expressing about the internet and so forth, tracking, when the boundary between tracking agent and monitored subject is worn thin by politics and commerce, a track does something else. And it reminds me of a very simple point that I want to end with, which is that seeing it's an ideology. It's an ideology in the world of poetry. It's an ideology in the world of text. Seeing, you got to see it, you got to read it, and that is very easy to be exclusive of people who are unseen, for instance, people who can't be seen, or seen so much that it's weird and dystopian. It seems to me what she's implicitly arguing is that listening, on the other hand, is inclusive. That listening, I mean, it's very hard not to hear the voices of the voiceless when they're making noises of disruption or staccato or whatever. And that this poem is kind of reclaiming listening as inclusive and thinking about that great era of seeing as maybe exhausted. Thank you all. This is really great. Thank you for thinking of this poem, and I guess you and Erin collaborated
Yes,
on it.
thank you to Erin for suggesting this work, which was not even out in the world yet. Is it now? It just is.
No, this has been out since 2019.
Oh,
I've been translating
bad.
it though. For the French translation is not coming out till
that's
November 5th.
That's what we were talking about.
Translating it into French.
I translated it into French. It's at the printers.
Can you hold the book up again? It's called 8-Track.
Yeah.
You're going to hold it so the camera can see it. It was published in 2019.
Got it.
And I'm going to try again to pronounce this name of this very important poet, Oana Avasilichioaei. Close?
Pretty good. I like it.
You want to do it again?
Well, I say mine isn't perfect either. Oana Avasilichioaei.
Let's all look out for this poet. Thank you all.